Welcome back to the Regent Law Podcast for another episode of Constitutional Conversations. Really excited about this episode. How about you, Christian?
Interesting topic, sensitive topic. Will hit home for a lot of people. I think it's gonna be a good one.
Absolutely. So last week we had three big cases, correct, come down from the Supreme Court. And the next few episodes, we're going to break down one case at a time. What's on the docket today?
Yeah. So today is our Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton case, which is the Texas law that regulated pornography with minors. So it's a pretty interesting topic, interesting law. I'm excited to break it down.
So the name of the case is again what?
Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton. So Free Speech Coalition is a adult entertainment industry group. And then Paxton is a government official in Texas, Ken Paxton. He's the attorney general there, and he's defending the law in this case.
We usually don't break down the names of the parties too much, but I bet some people would be kind of surprised to hear the name. You're saying Free Speech Coalition Incorporated. To me, that sounds like a pro-liberty group that wants to fight for free speech for all Americans. But you're saying, what is the group?
Well, they are an adult film industry group. And that's the thing that's kind of interesting about this case, Pat, is that what you're talking about with freedom of speech for individuals and freedom to consume information and speak as you want, that includes, to a degree, pornography. Yes, viewers, it does include pornography. And so I'm going to try to break down a little bit of how pornography is protected and why and what it has to do with minors. But whenever you're talking about free speech, pornography is involved with that.
Okay. So let's break down the case. Yeah. Who brought the case? What happened?
So the case is, let's just talk about the law first. So the law is in Texas, and it is an age verification law. So let's just break down the who, the what, and the why. So who is involved here? It is any website that publishes 1/3 or more of their material that's considered obscene for minors. It's pornographic material. And what happens is what does this require? If you're publishing 1/3 or more, it requires the website to have some type of age verification procedure to enter the website. Many of us know this as maybe putting in a driver's license number, last four of your social. A lot of companies now are using facial verification in order to determine if you are of age to enter this site. So that's the who.
That's so Texas, Paxton is the Attorney General of Texas. Texas was trying to pass a law to protect minors' use of porn sites.
Right, and that's kind of the why. Why would they do that? The reason is because they want to protect kids from these sites. They want them to not be able to access them and to protect them in a way that we've done for a long time, right? We've protected children from accessing adult bookstores or adult movie theaters. This is just the new phenomenon with the internet of protecting children in that way.
Okay. So what happened? What?
Yeah. So it's an interesting case because there is basically the exact case a few decades ago. It's called Ashcroft, and the case was dealing with actually a federal statute at the time, not a state statute. This is a Texas state statute that dealt with the same matter, and the court there said unconstitutional because it burdens adults' speech rights. So let me just break down kind of really quickly this speech issue of pornography, because I think probably a lot of our viewers are saying, wait, what? Pornography is protected speech? Well, sometimes, okay? Sometimes it's protected. So I won't get into the details, but certain
Can I just stop? This has nothing to do with whether you're for pornography or not.
No, it's just a matter of if it's protected speech or not.
Right, okay.
So it's not protected. All right, we're going to go in the negative here. It's not protected if it's considered, and the term of art is obscene. Right. And Supreme Court, in a case called Miller, which we don't need to go into detail about, kind of created a 3-part test to determine if material is obscene or not. We can assume here that the material on the websites in question is not obscene for adults, because if it's obscene generally, it's not protected material and the government can regulate it as much as they want.
So you're
In this,
saying, sorry, I'm just
yeah,
jumping
no,
in
no,
here.
I'm nerd alert. Sorry.
So back when in a famous Supreme Court case called Miller,
Yeah.
you're saying the court said, like all constitutional rights, we want to protect them as much as possible, and sometimes that's going to involve protecting something that your neighbor does that you can't stand. It doesn't protect just the words you want to say, but everyone, except for, in this case, they decided there are certain things that we deem not worthy of protecting. And one of those was obscenity, right?
Right. There are certain categories of speech that have no protection and can be regulated, as much as the government wants to. All right. So, a lot right now, a hot issue is false speech, just false statements. We're seeing that a
Okay.
lot with disinformation and misinformation. The court's grappling with that and what exactly that is. But another one of those is obscene material. And essentially, it's pornographic material. There's a couple of factors that are involved, but the one that's most important is that it has no literary or artistic value. Right. And
Okay.
so if it doesn't have that, then it's not protected and the government can regulate that. In this case, we are assuming the material is not obscene for adults. So
Okay.
adults have a First Amendment right to view this material. The standard, though, is different, obviously, with children. The
Right.
standard is much more different. The government has a lot more leeway to regulate the consumption of pornographic material, whether or not it's obscene or not, for children. And the threshold for something being obscene for a minor is much lower than it is for a consenting adult, right? And so that's what we're dealing with here, and that's why this case is interesting, because what the Free Speech Coalition is arguing is that what you're doing by implementing an age verification mechanism on the website, yes, you are limiting children from consuming this material,
Right.
which is great. You are also burdening adults' ability to view protected material. They have a right to see this
Wow.
material, and you're burdening that. And so that's where the case had to deal with this. And as I said earlier, it was weird because there's a case exactly on point, almost exactly like this a few decades ago. And the court said
Which normally in constitutional law, if
that
there's
is
a
called
previous
precedent.
case, yeah.
And precedent matters, right? So we have a thing called stare decisis, that if a former case has been decided, it holds value for cases that come after it. And so a lot of people thought, oh, this is just going to apply that Ashcroft case and it'll be fine. But the court didn't come out that way. All right. So I guess we can get to the holding of the court.
Yep.
It was a 6-3 majority opinion written by Justice Thomas.
Okay.
And Justice Thomas said that the law is perfectly fine. It's constitutional and it's allowed.
The Texas law.
Yeah, the Texas law is constitutional. And so just before I get into his reasoning, which is not terribly hard to understand, I just want to put forward the arguments of both sides. Free
Okay.
Speech Coalition is saying this is burdening adults' ability to access constitutionally protected material. Therefore, and I'm hearkening back to our last episode, that triggers what's called strict scrutiny.
They're going to scrutinize that because they're saying that's a huge right that all Americans should have. Whether or not I hate what this company is producing, they're trying to make that argument.
Yes, just as we talked about in the last couple episodes, when you're classifying or regulating or making law based on race, national origin, strict scrutiny. Well, one other way that strict scrutiny applies is if you're burdening a fundamental right.
Right.
What is a fundamental right here? Speech.
Yeah.
That's what's involved. Okay. And so that's what Free Speech Coalition was arguing, is that this should be evaluated under strict scrutiny. It's a law that regulates based on speech. Therefore, it should have to provide a compelling interest, narrowly tailored. Then you have A.G. Paxton, and he says this is not regulating speech at all. It's actually regulating minors' consumption of pornography, which is not protected. So therefore, it should go under rational basis. If you remember in our last episode, we talked about how rational basis is very deferential to the legislature determine what's best for the people of its jurisdiction. So those were the arguments, both sides. Strict scrutiny, rational basis. And Justice Thomas said, neither of you are correct. All right. He said, y'all are both wrong. We're going to go to that nice middle ground, intermediate scrutiny. So essentially, what Justice Thomas said is this law is not intended to limit protected speech, but it does incidentally burden speech. All right, that's essentially what it says, is that it's not intended to limit the speech rights of adults, but it does slightly burden them. And so the test there, if you remember, we talked about it last episode, is about the government having an important government interest. All right, so there's just, I want to break this down very clearly. The test is there must be an important government interest. One, it cannot, the law, the hands make me more.
I'm following you.
Okay, important government interest. Then the second, the law cannot be intended to limit protected speech. And then it should only incidentally burden speech to a degree. That's a very layman way of describing it. So let's just talk about the three. This won't be hard. What's the important government interest? Well, that's easy, right? What is it? I mean, it's to protect minors from accessing, pornographic material, which we as a society have determined is a good thing. We should not
protecting children online.
Protecting children online. That's universally accepted as an important government interest.
Yeah.
And so then Thomas had to deal with, well, is this law intended to suppress protected speech? Is it, in what we use in common law world, is it content based? Does it regulate content that is protected by the First Amendment? What did Thomas say? He said, no, it's intended to prevent children from accessing pornographic material that's not protected. And guess what, adults? You don't have a right to access pornography without age verification. And that makes sense, right? You don't have a right to access pornography without an age verification procedure.
So it's a scale of, he's saying your burden is not that big of a burden.
Well, and that's the key, right? That's really the last key is this too much of a burden on your speech? Because Thomas admits it does burden speech, as Free Speech Coalition says.
Right.
He says it does. You have to put in age, you have to have your age verified. But is that really a big burden? He says, no. Why? We do this in everything, right? We do it with gambling. We do it with alcohol. We do it with tobacco. We do it with renting a car. All of these measures require age verification. And we even have former Supreme Court cases saying this is okay with pornography. One of the cases the Supreme Court cited is a case called Ginsburg, and that was dealing with an adult bookstore. And what did the court say? Yes, it's okay for you to require carding someone, seeing their ID, so they can enter the adult bookstore. And he says, this is just like this case. It's just the internet. It's the same thing. And so he said this doesn't burden speech to a degree to cause it to be a constitutionally suspect law. So that's kind of really, it's important. It doesn't target protected speech, and it doesn't burden protected speech too much to create a constitutional issue.
Wow. Thanks for breaking that down. Yeah, thanks for breaking that down. So it's really, I didn't read the opinion by Justice Thomas, but I mean, can you hear in the opinion? I know there's constitutional formulas you're talking about, but I mean, is it just fair to say that he's really weighing the protection of children online, that thing we all agree on is a good thing to do, weighing that against whatever rights we think are being infringed upon? There's a balancing act there, or not really like that.
I think it's somewhat that, but the key, piece to the case is the law, is it targeting protected speech?
Right.
Is it unrelated to protected speech? And that's where the crux of the argument was. And Thomas says it's unrelated because it's meant to target keeping children from viewing this children have no right to view this material. The Supreme Court has said this. So it's not targeting protected speech. And
Right.
that's where Free Speech Coalition would absolutely disagree. AG Paxton would, and that's where the court came down. It's unrelated to protected speech,
So
and it doesn't burden it too much.
does this case now change anyone's life in America or in Texas?
It absolutely does, and it'll change the life of Americans in roughly 20 states right now. There are 20 or so states that have implemented measures like Texas to require age verification for pornographic websites. So one thing it does is it limits the ability of adults, okay, to view this material. But what I'm a little more concerned with is it protects children. And so your children can no longer go onto websites. Again, in Texas, this is the law. It's different in other states, but they have a third of the material as being obscene to minors. If they
Wow.
have that, then you have to verify your age through a license or facial recognition or something of that sort. That's a huge win for parents.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it's a huge protection for children. And many states, as I said, 20-ish, have implemented laws like this. And this Supreme Court opinion greenlit all those laws to be constitutionally a-okay.
Wow.
So it's got a real impact on Americans, absolutely. And one thing I'll say, Pat, that does go to the opposite side is what's one of the major concerns for it's not just the ability to view pornography. One of the concerns that Free Speech Coalition was worried about is privacy, right? We've seen in the past where there have been leaks of personal information from sensitive websites. And Thomas basically said, well, in this instance, the websites have every incentive to protect this material and
Right.
this sensitive information. So we're going to leave it at that. They're going to take care of it and they're going to protect the material.
Christian, thanks for the breakdown of that case. I know a lot more about it, and I'm sure our listeners do too. Excited about the next two episodes. We're going to look at two more cases that came out last week, and we're excited to see you guys on there. Once again, if you want to learn more about Regent Law School, or the Constitutional Law Center that Christian directs at Regent Law School, you can see it in the details below. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Hey, like and subscribe. Have a great day.
Right. See ya.